Greetings, listeners. This is Grant Ellis, aka PFC Amy Grant from Reddit and Twitter, and I'm going to walk through my process for preparing my Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Currently, we are playing a hybrid super campaign of Out of the Abyss and Storm King's Thunder. We've been playing since February of last year, so it's been just a little over 12 months of playing with these characters in this campaign world. We transitioned from Out of the Abyss to Storm King's Thunder at level 5, and for the past few months, the players have been wandering the Savage Frontier, aka the North, in the Forgotten Realms setting, and primarily I wanted to do this recording to help newer players and give back to the community. A lot of members of Reddit and Twitter and Facebook have offered me suggestions on how to make this a great campaign. I'd like to share some of the valuable insight that I've learned along the way, and hopefully this will be of value and merit to the listeners. I felt it would be best to start by discussing the players and the characters within my campaign. Each player is unique, as they are an individual human being with their own nuance and play style and experience level in the campaign, and there's a wide array of characters. The original framework that we had in this campaign when we began it as a one-shot adventure, one-shot session as a gap filler to fill in between the regular campaign session, I stepped in as Dungeon Master, and I handed over a stack of pre-generated characters to the 3 players that could make it for that impromptu session when we began Out of the Abyss. And 2 of the players took pre-generated characters. One took a Wood Elf Ranger, and the second one took the Half-Orc Paladin from the Wizards of the Coast website. And the third player really liked the look of the Dragonborn Sorcerer, but he really wanted to play a Warlock, so he rolled up stats and he decided to be a Dragonborn. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I was going to allow Dragonborn into the campaign. I was relatively new to Dungeons & Dragons, and I wasn't really sure how I felt about them as a player race, but I said, you know what, this is just a one-shot. Let's let him play whatever race and player class that he would like, and we would allow it. As the campaign grew and more players began to attend, right around the time the players hit level 3 and level 4, we had a boom in the party and a boom around participation. I allowed players to use and playtest Unearthed Arcana material. I also allowed players to help adapt new player character races, such as goblins, orcs, etc., to fit into our party. Now, we began the campaign before Volo's Guide to Monsters, so we did our best. After that supplement was released, we reviewed the features and traits of the players and decided what we'd allow and disallow. I'm going to quickly go over the party members. The original party members were a half-orc war priest, and the player has a very analytical style. He likes to follow story and narrative, but he also likes to get really powerful magic items and finds those very unique and interesting. But at heart, he loves a good story, and he's willing to follow the story path and the narrative, and a lot of his decision-making process is based upon where does the story say they should logically go. The second player from the original party, when we began a year ago, is my wife, who actually plays the Wood Elf Ranger. She recently underwent an alignment change as a consequence of drawing from the Deck of Many Things, and she was really struggling after drawing this card, claiming she did not know how to play a lawful evil character as her alignment was switched from chaotic good. And I said, well, here's a simple way to look at it. Let's list 5 situations and how you would respond to them. You yourself, or you, your character, how you would respond to these situations. Understand that the card you drew would cause your decisions to essentially flip-flop. You have a different set of values, you have a different set of ethics. You are now a creature of law, and you have this evil slant. And she's really actually embraced this, and she's a little more outspoken as a player now, and she's actually enjoying being a character that has a dynamic such as that. To make things interesting, the party came into possession of a Helm of Change alignment, and one of the players ended up trading the helm for a bunch of winged cats called Tressum, and he was kind of in a foul mood, and he just felt like, sticking his middle finger up at the rest of the party. But that was her chance to change her alignment, and she was fine with it, though. She was like, no, just as long as I get one of the Tressum, I'm okay. The next players I'd like to discuss are a combination of two players that I'd like to call the Grackle-Stuglians. There are two players who joined the campaign while the party was exploring the Dwargar city of Gracklestug in the Out of the Abyss campaign. One player plays a Blue Goblin Awakened Mystic. The Mystic is the Unearthed Arcana Psionic class. He's a very mature player, a very critical thinker, likes to discuss options, and likes to engage in social interaction style of roleplay, where his player will enter dialogue and discourse with non-player characters, for better or for worse. He is of a true neutral alignment. He's very pragmatic. For example, the Fire Giants in the campaign are building a 300-foot tall dragon-slaying colossus. His character doesn't necessarily feel this is a bad thing because it might be useful for the North for the Giants to have a 300-foot tall dragon-slaying colossus. He's a very sharp player, but sometimes he might be a little overly cautious because, well, to be honest, he's put a lot of work into his character and he doesn't want him to die on a whim. However, he has the best attitude towards negative consequences, whether it impacts himself or anyone else, because he feels it makes the game extremely interesting. The second Grackle-Stuglian is a player who plays a Warforged Swashbuckler. We pulled the Warforged from the Eberron Unearthed Arcana, and he was essentially the Batman of Gracklestug. He is a rogue with a swashbuckler archetype and a noble background. We'll talk a little bit more about his retainers a little later. He took the knight variant for his background. He's a very enthusiastic player, but he's a soft-spoken guy. He's still learning the mechanics and the tactics, and he actually brings a good competitive nature and competitive spirit, and he's also a good morale booster to have in the party. But when the going gets tough, you can tell he actually puts his game face on and he's ready to meet the challenges presented before him. Good guy to have at the table. Now, we have two longtime players who were part of the original party members in this campaign. However, one of their characters is currently exploring a dungeon delve separate, apart from the party. He couldn't make it 1 week with that character and ended up on a side quest. The other player actually played the original Warlock from the Out of the Abyss campaign, but he lost him to the Deck of Many Things. He is currently being held in an extra-dimensional orb someplace in the campaign world. Nobody knows yet, and no one will know the location, save they use a wish spell. And he's essentially signed his character over for the time being, and he decided to test the Unearthed Arcana Deep Gnome Artificer character. So he's playing a Deep Gnome, which is not from Unearthed Arcana, but the new Artificer class that they announced, he decided to give it a shot and see what we can learn about this player class. And the other player is playing a Drow Pallylock, a combination of a Paladin and a Warlock. Now, if you go on subreddits such as 3D6, etc., you can find really interesting min-maxi style builds to optimize characters that may have been more useful in older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. They're still useful now. That character really packs a punch, but he spent an enormous amount of time on character background. It's a female character known as the Fey Knight. She's not from the Underdark. They are a group of dark elves that left the Underdark and have lived in forested areas for a while. She worships the Queen of the Unseelie Court and really packs a punch. It's an interesting character concept and kind of fits in with the group. You may notice the theme here. We have half-orcs, we have goblins, we have warforged, we have deep gnomes, we have more dark elves, and essentially she fits right in. Now, when the party does show up in most towns, the townsfolk are scared to death of them and somewhat racist towards them. I think that's a good aspect to continue to explore, sort of the social aspect of Dungeons & Dragons. The Wood Elf Ranger's not too sure why. Nobody likes her friends. And the next player is a player who had been playing Dungeons & Dragons since the 1980s. His son wanted to give 5th edition a chance, so he started playing with us so he could learn a little more about the rules and the mechanics. He's a good note taker, he's a good tactician, and he plays Zax the Hunt Lord. And he's known as Zax the Hunt Lord because essentially he became Lord of Noenar Keep after they killed the Wraith Lords, and the Deck of Many Things granted him with possession of a keep, and it happened to be the one that they were in. A little bit more about the other players too. The player that plays the Drow Paladin Warlock combo has been playing Dungeons & Dragons since 1976. He is a dungeon master that I play under on occasion. Good guy, veteran, retired military, wealth of experience, has actual real-world knowledge of how many of the weapons and strategies and defenses work, and a very creative player, comes up with creative problem solving. And the player who plays the Deep Gnome Artificer is a very youthful experimenter. He likes playing different races, different classes, almost to a fault, where he wants to discard each character and just start with a new one just so he can try out and sample more abilities. And a lot of that has to deal with what I call the rebound. When he lost his Warlock, his Dragonborn Warlock, who'd been around for a year and he had put so much work into, he's kind of like someone who just got out of a long-term relationship and they're experimenting with new relationships and none of them are quite sticking. The party has a couple of NPC companions, or at least they did. Now, I am in the future and I know what has happened over the past 3 sessions, but I'm going to preface this and talk about my prep for each adventure over this story arc. And when the story arc began, they had 4 NPC allies and 2 animal companions. They had Jorlin Duskren, who is the original NPC ally they had from Out of the Abyss. He was a frenemy. He was the mechanism that led to their escape in the Underdark from Velkenvelv, and they confronted him later at level 5 during a massive combat against the Drow. I did a video some time ago that talked about me totally botching that combat due to my inexperience, but they ended up picking him up as an NPC ally. Now, he has shifted alignment from lawful evil to lawful neutral. My theory is he might be slipping back into his evil ways. Then there's the 3 other hirelings are actually the retainers to the Warforged Swashbuckler with the knight background. Guido, Giovanni, and Giuseppe, which happens to be the 3 given names to an ancient relative of a former mentor of mine, Guido, Giovanni, Giuseppe, Natali. And that is the Drow Squire, the Dwargar Groom, and the Deep Gnome, essentially Tinker, that helps keep the Warforged maintained and good to go. The animal companions, the Ranger has an ape named Curious George, Waka Waka, and the Artificer has a construct companion, which is essentially a obsidian black saber-toothed tiger. If we want to talk about the specs of the party, they're actually fairly loaded on magic items. They've had to overcome great obstacles over the past course of the year, and they have been rewarded for that. And the Adventure of Storm King's Thunder is very generous with magic items. They are given out like candy often. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because giants can kill a 6th or 7th level character in 1 or 2 hits potentially, or at least knock them down and force them to make death savings throws. And I've been making it a hobby of mine to come up with better tactical combat and more interesting ways to challenge the players in combat. I really want to differentiate between the monsters and humanoids and creatures that the players encounter. For example, a fight against the Yuan-Ti should be different than a fight against the Drow. There should be different tactics, there should be different strategies, there should be different role-playing encounters that go along with that story arc. It should not necessarily be both sides run into each other and start swinging till the other side drops. Now, my intention isn't for this to be the video about designing and running combat encounters in 5th edition in my campaign with these players as the targets. That'll be a later video. But what I do want to go over is some things that I do to help facilitate and make the adventure easier to run. First things first, in each adventure session that we run at the table, one player is assigned the duty of keeping track of initiatives and hit points, or rather, damage done to members of the party. He keeps track of every damage total that any creature does to a party member, and he also keeps a running total for each encounter of the current initiative of each party member. What this does is it helps keep track of who goes when in combat, and he also does the additional task of reminding people they're on deck, they need to have a game plan. They're going to have about 6 seconds to declare what their action is in combat, unless they need a clarification, where I am generous and I explain the circumstance to them so their character can have all the information needed to make a decision that would be in alignment with their character. And it's a good task to do. Another player is charged with the task of keeping track with all the items that they find. A third player keeps notes on story moments, NPCs they encounter, locations, adventure hooks, and threads. Now, I have 7 players at the table. Not everyone is given a detailed job like that, but it helps to have a couple of assistants and helpers to facilitate the session for the players in regards to those adventure aspects that are most important to them. It's good for them to know when it's their turn to go in combat. It's good for them to be able to quickly reference how much damage a character has taken. Likewise, it is good for someone, to the best of their recollection, to come up with the adventure hooks and threads that they've discovered over the course of the many months of playing. Another task that we delegate is the task of mapping for the party. Whether their character has pen and paper and the cartography skill doesn't really matter, and I'm not even sure if that's a thing in 5th edition, but someone can keep track of the pathway through the dungeons. It's helpful for the players to do a powwow before the adventure begins and go over any housekeeping items for the characters, a reminder of how many spell slots each character has left if we're in the middle of an adventure and the characters haven't had a chance to take a short or long rest, to keep track of maybe their next options when they level up, and also to sort of strategize and come up with efficient tactics for when it all will inevitably hit the fan. My job is to make sure that each of these players, who are very special and important to me because they take time out of their week to play Dungeons & Dragons at my table, one responsibility I had as Dungeon Master was to make sure that characters had deep hooks into the locations where the adventure was to take place. The goal is for them to end up at the Forge of the Fire Giants. Now, the players have agency and can make choices, but some of the players had a mission to meet with the Harpers at the city of Everland and be assigned a task to lead their characters to Citadel Felbar in the north, where there is a hook to the forge. Other characters in the party had an existing hook with Citadel Felbar. What it did is it helped create a unified focus. Now, they didn't have to go to the Citadel, they had other hooks. For example, the party has already met Harshnag the Grim. He would like to take them to the Temple of the Eye of the All-Father, and essentially the party has to decide, are they going to catch up with Harshnag, or are they going to continue pursuing the adventure hooks in the immediate area? The party decided, since they stand to receive many rewards, to stay in the area and pursue the nearby hooks. Now, they've managed to find teleportation circles within Moongleam Tower, and they now know that they can keep pursuing adventure hooks in the immediate area and then return to Moongleam Tower and solicit use of the teleportation circles to catch up with Harshnag, who is on his way far to the west of the party. So there you have it. This is the first video of prepping for this campaign, making sure that each player has time in the spotlight, understanding why the player decides to play Dungeons & Dragons, how he interacts with the group dynamic, what sort of character he's running, understanding the potential for the character, what magic items they have, assigning and delegating tasks to facilitate the running of the game, and making sure that there are hooks to the adventure that I plan and prep and intend to run. Now that you've heard a little bit about my campaign, let's talk a little bit about yours. Who are the players at your gaming table? What characters are they running? What adventure hooks are tied to each character within their current location in your campaign setting? How does each player impact combat encounters, exploration, and social interaction within the game world? What sort of equipment do they have? What kind of spells can they cast? How should you be planning around the party and group dynamics? Do the characters complement the players? Is there friction at the table because of player combinations and character combinations? And how do you diffuse that or fuel that if it makes the game more fun and more interesting? The next video will be around dealing with the sandbox nature of my world. I had to prepare the Forge of the Fire Giants, but there wasn't a guarantee that my characters would end up there, and the players had agency and choices and decisions to determine where the adventure would end up.